those who watch our podcast, listen to our podcast, know that I am not a political man, but I am a biblical man. Our influence, our voice should be biblical in the way we go about voting, praying, etc.
It's very hard to find candidates that perfectly are going to represent what it means to be a Christian. Every Christian must vote. He thinks putting your vote towards an independent candidate that just makes you feel good is a complete throwaway vote and a cop-out. One of these two parties, one of these two leaders is going to be the executive.
To be honest with you, if 100% of the evangelicals in America voted, we would start turning this ship.
You got to understand, the Christian's the only thing that kind of sits in the way of a tyranny. And so you are going to continue to see the name of Christianity be drugged through the mud.
Hey everybody, welcome to the John Bevere podcast. I'm so excited. This is a special edition. We're kind of diverting from 2 Peter, and we're going to have a guest who I absolutely love, and that is Gabe Lyons. Gabe, welcome. I want to introduce you. Let me just tell everybody about you. You are the founder and the president of Think Media, which is a powerful organization. You have the Undercurrent podcast that you host. You also do Rhythms for Life with Rebecca, your wife. You are a best-selling author. And what's really cool is you've got your wife, Rebecca, who's also a best-selling author. And I think she's actually sold more books than you, right?
She sold a lot more books.
I know, isn't that cool? You know, my wife's a New York Times bestseller, and I'm always like, hey, I'm not the New York Times bestseller. Lisa Bevere's the New York Times bestseller. So I totally get you, brother.
Yep. I mean, it's very much been about how do we pursue what God's put in front of us, keep risking as we move forward,
yep,
and keep moving into the new opportunities that He's providing to advance truth in our time. I've personally, since I was in my early 20s, felt very called to communicate truth to my generation, dealing with the questions, the conversations, the topics, the current issues that it felt like were so important to my generation. But I was having a hard time always finding Christian leaders that were addressing some of those issues, and especially not through Sunday morning sermons. And so that's been a lot of the work that we began 20 years ago that's now Think Media.
And so elaborate more on Think Media, what you really are trying to get people to open up to.
Things aren't always that new. Like, they continue to repeat themselves.
Right.
And so we are just trying to help Christians know how to discern the times, to understand the times, and to really understand how to navigate culture and remain faithful and steadfast, no matter what new topics or ideas are coming, because I think we all understand we're going to be hit with a lot more noise, a lot more information, a lot more propaganda. And how do we stay grounded and anchored? And that's the work of Think, is to help Christians know how to do that, especially on the front lines of culture.
If you walk away from what I'm saying right now, saying I'm being political, you're missing the whole point. What I am saying is our influence, our voice should be biblical in the way we go about voting, praying, etc. What we do in our communities, what we do for our state, what we do nationally. And I would say that we have a responsibility. And if we don't use that responsibility, then that means people who are ungodly, they're going to take that place and they're going to let their voice be known. Then all of a sudden, we've got a regime, a government that is actually anti-biblical standards because we the believers didn't voice.
Right.
So
That's right.
I'm deeply concerned about this right now because I find so many Christians, I mean, maybe you can even answer this. I heard a percentage the other day that I wanted to fall over when I heard it, but it was almost like 40% of the evangelicals are not even going to, 40% are only registered to vote, 60% are not. I don't know if that's true. You would know much more than me. Let's go down that road.
Yeah, that's pretty consistent. I mean, that people literally don't register to vote, and that's crazy. I mean, there are certain countries, I think of Australia, for example, where everyone has to vote or you're fined, right? They take it so seriously that people must vote that in America it's become such a casual thing, which explains a lot of the hyperbole that we hear in the media and why people say such bombastic things, because they're trying to get people off their couch to actually go vote. But to your point, we have the most beautiful situation in America. Like, our founders and those before us fought to give us the right to choose and to elect, and that we actually are the ones that lead the government, right? The government works for us.
That's a republic.
People. That's right. It's a republic, not a democracy.
Right.
As you actually will hear so many political leaders talk about. Democracies are actually not the best setup. Our founders were not for democracy. They were for a republic. They were for a representative republic. And so when we don't choose to elect our leaders, we have completely abandoned this amazing responsibility that we've been given, that's been fought for, that most countries would die to have this opportunity. But in addition to that, our votes can't just be about these elections that take place every 4 years. And you and I are talking about it because it's a presidential election. We're talking about who's going to be the executive, who's the president. But many times we forgo the voting that takes place on an annual basis in our own local communities. But John, this country breaks down into 3,200 counties, roughly, okay? So the 3,200 counties, those counties, each county runs a little bit differently. And it's based on who's the school board, who's your county commissioner, who's your sheriff. You see, these are actually the offices, and I think this was a great experiment where people could watch this play out just a few years ago when COVID policies were being enacted, pushed federally, and you started to see states go, well, I'm not going to adopt that, or I am going to do that. And then you got down to the counties, and whoever your county leadership was, that was determining what your life was going to look like. And so it's a good example and a reminder, these local elections, they matter a lot. Certainly whoever's running this country, our senators, our Congress, our president matters, and party platforms matter, and your vote matters. And sometimes your vote is one that you use to vote against something that you are 100% against. And then sometimes it's you're voting 100% for something. It's very hard to find candidates that perfectly are going to represent what it means to be a Christian. But you certainly can find candidates, and you can find those who can represent the majority of what you believe to be true about how God's designed human beings to function and flourish. And that's ultimately, to me, what this process is about, is us as Christians recognizing what are the imperfect policies being put forward that will cause the most human flourishing. To me, that is the central question Christians should be asking in this election.
So can I address an attitude that so many have? They don't vote because they don't like either candidate. And I really want to take the time to address this. There have been so many times I've walked into a voting poll, and I'm talking about local, state, and national. I didn't like either candidate that was on the ballot, either one, on the major ballot. Because if I vote for an independent, I'm basically throwing my vote away. But I had to choose which one was more in line with the Bible, and I had to realize I'm not electing a pastor. I'm not electing my wife like 41 years ago when I was choosing my wife. I'm electing the better. So let's just do a scenario. We got 15 people that are godly. These 15 people know the Word of God. They're godly. Then we got 10 people that are completely like they're ungodly. They want to abuse people. They want government to control people's lives. Okay. And these 15 outnumber the 10. Now we got two candidates. All the 15 people don't like either candidate, but one candidate says, we're going to kill babies up to 1 year, and we're going to kill everybody over 65 because they're not worth society anymore. The other candidate goes, this and this and this, but definitely don't agree with that, and that's not on his or her platform. All these 15 people go, I don't like either one, so I'm not voting. Now they've just given the majority vote to that 10, and that 10 could possibly elect that person that says we're going to kill all the 65-year-olds and all the babies that are under 1 year old that you don't like, you feel like it's not right, you can just, we'll call it abortion and it's done.
Yeah.
By you withdrawing, you have actually enabled the ungodly to pick. So your hand now is responsible. By your negligence, we have sins of commission and sins of omission.
Yeah.
This is a sin of omission. By you pulling away, not making your voice know when it's your responsibility, you now can actually say, I'm responsible for allowing that person to get elected. I know I am probably making some people feel very uncomfortable by saying you are responsible. But to be honest with you, if 100% of the evangelicals in America voted, we would start turning this ship.
Yeah. Well, and you're in good company. Os Guinness, who's a social critic, historian, somebody who really understands this at a philosophical level, an academic level. He 100% agrees with you. Every Christian must vote. He thinks putting your vote towards an independent candidate that just makes you feel good is a complete throwaway vote and a cop-out, and that you actually should vote for who you know one of these two parties, one of these two leaders is going to be the executive. And you have a responsibility to steward that, knowing that, of course, neither one of these executives are going to be perfect, are going to 100% align. And I mean, I would step back further, John, and just say this election continues to represent something much more serious in the way that our country's moving forward. I think most of us understand there's an accelerating pace of change moving forward right now. And this election is going to represent leadership that actually is saying, you know what, I think the sovereignty of a nation matters. And one party actually thinks the sovereignty of the nation isn't as important, that we actually should start to become part of more of a global community. And you're seeing so much more discussion about the global versus the national, versus the state. And this is a very important thing for Christians to understand, because what we're seeing more of, especially over the last decade, but the last several years it's accelerated, is you have global crisis that requires global solutions, that require global institutions, that ultimately require global governance, which ultimately gets to a one world government. I mean, that's where that journey leads. And yet you have a nation that in the middle of that says, no, actually, we're a nation. We care about our borders. We care about our boundaries. We care about the culture that we've created for human beings to flourish. And we believe that we are going to try to exist in the best way that we can, as America has for hundreds of years, in a way that people long to be a part of this nation, because there's a set of values, there's a set of principles, there's a basis to this that's actually much stronger than whatever this global governance thing is going to be. And so this election continues to push into that, where I think Christians should be thinking about that. Do we want to be part of a global government, a one world government, or do we think it's more important for the nation to exist? But one step further, you see the nation exists to resist the global. That's why a nation actually exists. And then you go to the local level. The local exists to kind of resist the nation and resist federalist policies that come down and impact the local. George Washington talks about this 48 times. He makes this reference to Micah 4:4, where he talks about every man sitting under their vine and fig tree. And it's this really interesting reference where when he describes it, he talks about when he retires, he wants to go back to Mount Vernon to sit under his own vine and fig tree. And it's a reference to localism. This idea that every human being actually should have the opportunity to sit underneath their own food source, that they should have their own little plot of land that allows them to be independent. And that verse goes on to say, with no fear of man, that you'd sit in peace, not fearful of somebody coming to take what is yours. It was an ultimate thing that George Washington appreciated because it spoke to individual liberty, individual freedom. And I believe that kind of conversation's a very important one for the Christian right now, because we're moving into a season where resisting tyranny, resisting sort of authoritarian type policies that seek to control individuals versus support individual liberty, families, those are the things that are part of the ballot as you think about this election season.
You know, I just look at there's two regimes right now on a national, local, and even, I mean, it's happening everywhere. And I think you have to ask yourself, do we have a resistor or a transgressor that we're voting for? I think I would ask people to think, what would be more dangerous? Somebody who actually resists a believer, the Christian faith, or somebody who transgresses? And I think the transgressor, yes, it's wrong, both are wrong, is less dangerous to our individual freedoms under that fig tree than the resistor, because the resistor says, I want to control you, and you're going to believe what I believe, even though I don't really believe in anything.
Yeah.
I believe in myself. I believe in government. I believe we make our own lives. And I think this is so important that people understand that. You're just allowing people to get into local, state, and national levels that want to control you.
Yeah. The point is, replacing God leads to a complete dehumanization of a society. And so the third is we actually devolve into a crisis that essentially is where a lot of leaders would point and say we are, which becomes a group of people that become an anti-Christian group. They start to come against Christian ideas, because you got to understand the Christian's the only thing that kind of sits in the way of a tyranny. Because Christians have no allegiance to a government, no allegiance to a king or to even a president or an executive. We have an allegiance to God. That's who tells us what to do. We are going to operate as part of a kingdom that literally sits itself outside of whatever this global rule is going to be. And so that resistance to that is an incredible threat. And so you are going to continue to see the name of Christianity be dragged through the mud, because Christians must be gotten out of the way.
Yes.
And it right now is through rhetoric, but one day it could be actually by force.
All it takes is for the wrong leadership to get that power they want, and then all of a sudden freedoms are lost. I've had so many people from Eastern Europe saying, you guys are walking through what we walked through. We saw it coming. And these are really old people that speak to me. We saw it coming back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, whenever it happened for their nation in Eastern Europe. You guys are walking into this right now. We see all the similar signs that are happening because you're doing nothing. You're allowing it. Your voices are silent. And I think, and I know some people are going to be really upset, but silence is consent.
Mm-hmm.
When we remain silent, then all of a sudden we are granting access for evil to take a stronger foothold.
Yes.
And I want to return back to the local because the local is so important. There is a church that I am in relationship with. And this church, all of a sudden, they started realizing the hideous things that were being taught in high schools, in their public high schools. Like, unbelievable. All about sex change, everything else, affirming and everything else. And so they said, here we are. We're this church with influence. What are we doing just watching this? So one of the executive pastors started going around all the churches and said, look, we can talk about family members that are running. Aren't we part of the family of God? I mean, you're not wanting to lose your 501c3 status because you don't want to talk about, the election. Just say, we got a family member. It's running. If you want to vote for the family member, this is who they are.
Yeah.
They started doing that. They took over the school boards, literally took over in 7 counties around the church, and they took over the city council, and everything started changing.
Yeah.
They stopped bringing in the books, teaching the students what they were teaching, because why? Leadership.
That's right.
John Maxwell says something that's so true, and that is that leadership is about influence. And as the leader goes, so go the people. And so this is why what you're doing is so very important. These are things, practical things we can actually do.
Yeah.
To be a light, to be salt. We're called to be a salt and light into a dark world. And Gabe, when I look at it, Psalm 60 says, darkness is going to cover the earth, and deep darkness the people.